Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers. I'm Indu Saxena, host and the moderator of this session. Today's session is focused on the relationship between India and Pakistan in the last 75 years. As we know, the two countries have embarked on their journey with a bitter past of partition in 1947, followed by 3 wars and a conflictual relationship till date. Their adversarial relationship always impacted South Asian geopolitics and influencing the global politics as well. I would say that South Asian geopolitics has always been overshadowed by rivalries between India and Pakistan, and their foreign policy and interest lies with great powers. Now at the critical juncture of Asia pivot or Indo-Pacific as a priority theater, and with a great power competition in Indo-Pacific, it's important to discuss how India-Pakistan's future relationship trajectories will portray South Asia and Indo-Pacific at large. Let's listen what our experts have to say about this. Before diving into the substance, I would like to briefly introduce our stellar panel. We have Mr. Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Ambassador Trigunayat is a member of the Indian Foreign Service. He has served in the Indian missions in Cote d'Ivoire, Bangladesh, Mongolia, USA, Russia, Sweden, Nigeria, Libya, and Jordan. He served as an ambassador of India to Jordan, Libya, and as High Commissioner to Malta. He is the author of the Tricks on Track Diplomacy Unwound for the India Observer USA. As a visiting fellow, he conducted research work on WTO and regional trading blocks at the Oxford University. He has recently edited a book titled Evolving Security Dynamics in West Asia and India's Challenges. He is a frequent writer and contributor on the issues of India's foreign policy, South Asia, and West Asia. Thank you, sir, for joining us. We have our speaker, Mr. Michael Kugelmann. Michael is the Deputy Director of the Asia Program and Senior Associate of South Asia at the Wilson Center. He is a leading specialist on Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan, and their relationship with the United States. He is the editor or co-editor of 11 books. He has written for the New York Times, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, and other publications, covering topics ranging from US policy in Afghanistan to terrorism, to water, energy, and food security, and other issues in the region. And especially, I would like to say that South Asia Brief, the weekly brief of from Foreign Policy that always comes on Thursday. I interestingly read that brief written by Michael, and to see where I missed South Asia in this week. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. Our next speaker is Mr. Aman Hingorani. Mr. Hingorani is advocate on record and mediator in the Supreme Court of India and the High Court of Delhi. He is the author of the book Unraveling the Kashmir Knot by Sage Publications. Dr. Hingorani has been invited to address national and international audiences, including various stakeholders on the Kashmir issue. He also has a rich experience in teaching law courses at several institutions in India and abroad. Thank you for joining us, sir. We have Mr. Mohammad Rizawan with us. Mr. Rizawan is a former journalist. As a journalist for more than 20 years, he worked for various Pakistani and international organizations writing on terrorism and politics. He has been a South Asia Fellow at Pragmora Institute and is an affiliate of Canadian Network of Researchers and on Terrorism, Security, and Society. He's a contributor for the Defense Horizon Journal, Canadian International Council, Eurasia Review, and others. So this is the brief introduction of our panelists. Now I would like to start with Mr. Ambassador Anil Trigunayat for his remarks. I would like to invite him, and just let me tell here the format of this. We are inviting our panelists for 10 minutes for their initial remarks, and then we'll followed by the question and answers. And so that talking about India-Pakistan relations to the South Asian geopolitics and how it's going to the influence in larger Indo-Pacific. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Indu, and very good evening from India. I hope you are able to hear me properly. It is indeed a great honor to be part of this very distinguished panel to discuss the Indo-Pak relations at 75. Has something changed or something drastic is likely to change is what we are going to probably mull upon today. But let me try to put these into some kind of a pointers in perspective in less than 10 minutes. And that is, I'll say, where India stands today. And secondly, how the India-Pakistan relationship and the relationship with third countries, and as you mentioned about the Indo-Pacific, is moving around, and where we are going to, whether we are going to have some kind of opening at all, in my view. So I feel that as far as India is concerned, in the last 75 years, she has done remarkably well on all pointers. It has remained the largest functional democracy, emerged as the third largest economy on PPP basis, as well as remains today, despite the pandemic and the war and all other problems, a fastest growing economy. And it aims to be about a $30 trillion economy by the time it completes 100 years of independence. Despite various wars with China and Pakistan, both covert and overt, and geopolitical competition and the games that is played out in our region, its foreign policy has been robust, resilient, and result-oriented, which is responsive to any challenges, internal as well as external. So it has also become today, therefore, a strategic pivot in the Indo-Pacific. Her efforts to follow and support multilateralism and plurilateralism and minilaterals and multi-alignment, that is a change that has come about, approaches and virtually a sane diplomatic voice of reason in the international discourse. More importantly, a philosophical policy that is called Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, means world is one family, and a soft power projection through that have positioned her into a responsible slot and a power to reckon with. It started with NAM, as you know, non-aligned movement. And today what we are seeing in the international discourse, India is following a policy of strategic autonomy. And I believe that if the Cold War 2.0 actually begins, that is very likely to happen, India will have once again opportunity to lead the nations for strategic autonomy. She has taken principled positions on international issues and has refused to bow down to bullying in most cases. She has followed a neighborhood first policy, Act East policy, Act West policies that are providing credible dividends to it. The vaccine Maitri, as we call, or the vaccine diplomacy, have been well appreciated all across during the pandemic and beyond. But it has had two major challenges on its borders, despite everything that has been done. That remains China and Pakistan, which, despite umpteen efforts, have not been able to see a reason for coexistence and develop together for the larger good of the people. Because we have a large problem of poverty, education. We have to come out of those issues. We can only deal with them if we are together. So India has tried very hard, both in a normal diplomatic channel through track 2, track 1.5, and even out of the box solutions. Like, for example, many of you might remember that when Prime Minister Modi was visiting Afghanistan, and when he was returning, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif asked him, how can you fly over Pakistan without visiting us? So he made an unscheduled stop, met his family and others. So that could have led to a that could have been an opening of sorts. The relationship could have improved much better. But unfortunately, what has happened is, and I'll come to that, is that every time there is an effort is made by the two sides and by the Indian side, we find that there is always some kind of a terror attack, major terror attack, that is whether it is Mumbai, whether it is Uri, Pathankot, and empty number ending up to Pulwama. And that is when the India decided that terror and talks cannot continue, and that Pakistan had said in Lahore Declaration that it will not allow its land to be used against India for any terror activities. But unfortunately, that has continued, and that has remained there. So I believe that there is a two problem, which I call a two T's. One is the trust deficit, and the other is terrorism. So these are the two things, unfortunately, India perceives, and it's rightly so, that Pakistan is following, or not, they maybe not the establishment per se, but the deep state in that sense from Rawalpindi in fields that the cross-border terrorism and religious fanaticism are the tools that could provide an asymmetric advantage. So that is something. Secondly, it also believes in a zero-sum approach wherever India is concerned. It's an India-centric policy, and that is why we are having problems. Despite that, we see that there have been collaborations, for example, on exchange of nuclear installations, exchange of prisoners, and also even religious corridors, and on humanitarian assistance. So there are things that are moving forward, but there are things that bilaterally have really come to a standstill. The two countries have also worked together in SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and RATS and others. And also India has provided any assistance that was required within the ambit of SAARC when the pandemic hit us. But now, as I can perceive, is that India's challenge has really moved from Pakistan to its northern neighbor, China. And even though both of them have an ironclad friendship through BRI, CPC, Gwadar, and are putting technical holds at the UNSC for designating global terrorists like Masood Azhar Makki and his brother Rauf Azhar. I feel that instead of doing good to China, to Pakistan, the Beijing is actually not only being complicit in these, but is also doing a great disservice to the Pakistani people. Taliban's onset has again given perhaps a little bit of heft to the Pakistani establishment because it was their babies who have come to power. But then they are seeing the way things are recoiling onto them, and they are having major problems. So India has to look at these in the Sino-Pak common matrix when it is going to look at its Indo-Pacific strategy, Quad, or whatever it is. So that becomes a pointer in order to deflect any untoward incident. Unfortunately, Pakistan has always needed a superpower prop, whether it was CENTO, CETO, we know that, or being a non-NATO ally, or it's China, ironclad friendship with China, or, for example, Prime Minister Imran Khan, then Prime Minister Imran Khan's sudden visit to Russia. So all these have really created some kind of a problem that we are seeing. CPC, as we know, is going through a lot of big problems at the moment. Gwadar, that was referred to an economic future of Pakistan, is struggling today, whether it is power plants, whether it is roads, road infrastructure. And Balochistan remains a major problem within the country. From 1940s onwards, the largest region. So Pakistan still is taking a security-related approach in that region, and that might recoil and create a problem for them eventually. And that's something they have to deal with. More importantly and drastically today, Pakistani economy is facing serious debt burden, a looming danger of default on various loans. And I believe that instead of using structural reforms, they are having problems in order to deal with it. That's the major challenge for Pakistan today. And it is in that context that it becomes increasingly difficult for a state to survive or from being a failed state. Because once the economic problems happen in a country, we are seeing what is happening in Sri Lanka, in some other countries, and we hope it does not happen. We know that the Pakistan foreign exchange crisis, steep depreciation of its rupee, double-digit inflation, 21%, and the corruption, policy inertia, all these are being attributed as the reasons. But for the ordinary people of Pakistan, this is a very major challenge. And how they are going to, how the new government of Shehbaz Sharif going to move forward in this direction remains to be seen, and we will have to watch. One more point I would like to make it that if actually I mean, I recall one, Mr. Tilak Devesha, he had written somewhere that he's coined a term called weep factors, like non-traditional threats that include water, education, economy, and population. They are also a problem in Pakistan. So we were hoping that when the Pakistan's national security policy came in, that it'll talk about some better pointers to improve relationship in the region, even though it says that Pakistan wants peaceful relations with India. But at the end of the day, all the other caveats like Kashmir dispute and military adventurism of India, non-contact warfare, etc., all these have created back to square one, basically. So I think that there's not much of a future as far as the bilateral relationship is concerned, but it is a fact that if Pakistan was to indulge in collaboration with India, and bilateral trade could have been there, which was stopped by Pakistan, I think that they could have benefited a great deal. And there was a very nice study done by Alfaq and Nikit Singla, which clearly articulated the facts that if bilateral trade, the two countries had it, it would have been far more better for both the countries to deal with it. And I think that it said that today we trade was roughly $2.6 billion, and most of it gets done via Dubai, far more expensive for the Pakistani people. So I think that they estimated that it could go up to 37 billion between us, because we have dependencies in economies and a mutually sustaining that could have happened. Of course, Pakistan has faced problems from FATF, as you know, the Sanjawari killing, in which somehow the Pakistani establishment was helpful to the Americans, trying to get back to the Americans after Imran Khan's verbosity. One thing is, lastly, that Pakistan's major problem of their politicians remains their problem or the control of the Pakistani army and the intelligence, which is the major arbiter of relationship between India and Pakistan. So I'll leave it there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir, for presenting the very brief and overview about the strategical significance of India and the policies that India has adopted due to looking at the Indo-Pacific construct and the challenges as well. What India has the challenges on its border, right, in the adversaries of like Pakistan and China, and like the 2T. What you told about that. So we'll take the questions on that. Now I would like to invite Mr. Michael Kugelmann to share his views. Michael, the floor is yours.
Well, first, thank you, Dr. Indu and your organization for inviting me. It's an honor to be on this panel. I also want to apologize that at this very moment, our next door neighbor decided to start some loud lawn work. So hopefully that won't, you'll all be able to hear me. Obviously, I come at this as someone who's not from India or Pakistan, a US analyst that studied the relationship in both countries for quite some time. So I provide an outside view. I thought that the presentation by the ambassador was a real tour de force. I agree with much of what he said. So I apologize that I may amplify some of what he said in my own brief comments. It's of course quite common around this time of year to reflect on the state of the India-Pakistan relationship as each country marks their independence anniversaries. But the 75-year anniversary, I think, is an especially important one to reflect on because it's a particularly tough time for the relationship. I'd argue that it is or has been settling in to a long, volatile, albeit hopefully peaceful stasis, an uneasy peace, so to speak. It's been quite some time since there was any type of comprehensive formal dialogue in place. And, of course, just a few years ago, India and Pakistan arguably came closer than they had in quite some time to going to war again. Geopolitics certainly don't favor the relationship right now. India has been scaling up defense cooperation with the US in recent years, setting the stage for major inflows of new cutting-edge US weaponry and defense technology into India. And a lot of this is because of these defense foundational accords that were finally signed by the two countries over the last few years. And that has enhanced India's military modernization, which has of course, already been boosted by large arms shipments from France, Israel, and of course, Russia and others as well. And this all has made Pakistan very weary about the risks of what it describes as strategic stability in South Asia. It has been increasingly difficult for Pakistan to achieve any semblance of parity with India, which it's long tried to do unsuccessfully for the most part, and that is concerning for Pakistan. Meanwhile, Pakistan, as we heard before, has its special relationship with China. That relationship has continued to strengthen, and this is clearly something that troubles India, which views Beijing as its biggest strategic and long-term rival and competitor. And for India, Pakistan's deep ties to a Chinese state that is increasingly nationalistic and aggressive in its foreign policy is certainly problematic. And finally, sort of on a side note, not really a side note, but sort of separate from the geopolitical story, I would argue that looking at the power of social media, how it's grown in recent years, and how it has been able to serve as a toxic multiplier of hateful words from hardliners on both the Indian and Pakistani sides, that has really projected the views of those that want nothing to do with a relationship that could look toward getting a bit better. And you have this very polarized phenomenon, which also has played out more broadly in the political environments and the media spheres of both countries as well, that I don't think provide welcome environments for discussions about thinking about better things for the relationship. Now, I think one might argue, to put on the optimist hat, that maybe all these troubling signs suggest that the relationship is due for something better, for some type of period of détente, and that, as this audience would know, the history of the India-Pakistan relationship is not a story of constant hostility. It's had some real bad times and wars, of course, but also some not so bad times, and a few relatively good times, and especially in the context of non-security cooperation. So, we heard before some comments about trade, and indeed that India-Pakistan trade relations have always fallen far short of their potential, but they have seen some success stories over the years, including when political and security tensions were quite bad. So, over the very first 18 years post-independence, there were 14 bilateral agreements related to trade facilitation in place. So, 1965, the year Pakistan and India went to war over Kashmir, 9 branches of 6 Indian banks were operating in Pakistan. And then in 1972, of course, the year after another war, the two sides reached an agreement to resume limited trade. And of course, we know there's been some cooperation in other non-security spaces over the years, from dialogues over water sharing tied to the Indus Waters Accord, which I think is still seen as one of the few major success stories in transnational water cooperation, particularly when it comes to two rivals. And there's also, of course, has been assistance that the two countries have provided to each other when one has suffered natural disasters. That's happened in the past. But of course, the most encouraging recent development for the relationship, I think, was a new border truce concluded last year, which helped bring down tensions a bit, even though it did not lead to a wider follow-on. It didn't lead to any wider follow-on cases of cooperation, though I don't think that was the intention on either side, even though some observers in both countries who supported a better relationship were hoping that could serve as a CBM for bigger and better things on the cooperation front. Didn't happen. But there are clearly several fundamental constraints to the relationship that are difficult to overcome, even if you start to see some positive signs elsewhere. And again, this was referred to before. Two policy issues that constrain better bilateral relations in a big way. One, of course, is Kashmir, and India's decision to revoke the special autonomous status of India-administered Kashmir several years ago. That it infuriated Pakistan, of course, and it set back relations in a big way, especially because that came just a few months after the whole Pulwama-Balakot situation. And of course, the other big obstacle is terrorism, as Pakistan has continued to harbor terrorist groups that threaten India. And so I think one of the evergreen questions about India-Pakistan relations, and it certainly applies on the 75-year anniversary, is whether the relationship will continue to be held hostage to those two issues, or are there ways to get around them and still see some forward movement toward better relations? So in other words, does forward movement on addressing those two issues still need to be preconditions for real dialogue and better relations? or will they remain intractable obstacles? If there's a way around them, what are some realistic CBMs to think about? It's a question that we're always thinking about. So far, I think the answer is no. I mean, there's no way around them. And as was mentioned before, no talks with terror has been a constant, consistent mantra of India and certainly the Indian government. And Pakistan, I think, especially given what happened in 2019, it's not going to let the Kashmir issue go. I mean, we all know the expression that many Pakistani leaders have said about Kashmir being Pakistan's jugular vein. So very briefly, I'll wrap up. We've been asked to discuss the impacts of the relationship on regional geopolitics, and I think that impact could be seen in three ways. Very briefly, first, the relationship has constrained regional integration. So SARC, which of course is the main regional organization in South Asia, it's essentially paralyzed, and it has been for quite some time because of India-Pakistan tensions. It's an organization that requires unanimity on decisions, but India and Pakistan often don't agree. So what we've seen over the last few years is that India-Pakistan tensions have produced a sub-regionalization dynamic. We're seeing India trying to build better regional relations with alternative mechanisms that don't include Pakistan. So India's efforts to strengthen BIMSTEC, which of course is a group comprised of several Southeast Asian states and many South Asian states, but not Pakistan. That's an example. And meanwhile, Pakistan has been trying to participate in new connectivity efforts with Afghanistan, as well as Uzbekistan, and at times other Central Asian states. As seen by, for example, a new transnational rail project between Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan. A second impact of India-Pakistan relations on geopolitics is, of course, the China factor. China, because of its deep friendship with Pakistan, has made Pakistan the cornerstone of BRI with CPEC. And China hopes, though perhaps it's a misplaced hope, to link CPEC with other areas in the region, especially Afghanistan. This, I think, deepens India-China tensions in this sense, but also India-Pakistan tensions, as Pakistan is a big part of a Chinese regional connectivity project that India, of course, categorically rejects because it passes through territory claimed by India. Third, I would argue that the whole Indo-Pacific ideal, the Indo-Pacific vision championed by India and the US and the other Quad countries and many European countries, deepens India-Pakistan tensions in an indirect way. The Indo-Pacific policy is at the end of the day a strategy to counter Chinese power, and Pakistan is, of course, allied with China. And so this means Pakistan will likely be left on the outside looking in on a project that has attracted support from some of the world's most powerful countries that Pakistan would ideally like to have better relations with, or at least economic relations. And this then, I think, accentuates the differences and divergences between Pakistan and India in another way. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for your holistic view about the social media, how the hardline social media is shaping the regional politics, and mainly the hardliner that you talked about. We will take a question on that, and how that the relations between these two constrains the regional integration, and if Pakistan feels left out in Indo-Pacific construct. So we will discuss in our question and answers. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Aman Hingorani. Sir, floor is yours.
Am I audible? Yeah, thank you, Indu, my very distinguished panelists, friends. I'm happy to be here to share my views on India-Pakistan at 75. I've heard the previous speakers. We have heard about how the strained relations between India and Pakistan have somewhat dominated the geopolitics on the subcontinent, the implications for the world, for international peace, security, international terrorism, economic stability, and also, as the ambassador put it, both countries could have put the money to better use, trying to build up facilities for health, education, climate change, environment, infrastructure development, basically improving the quality of the life of the citizens. But at the heart of India-Pakistan strained relations does remain the Kashmir issue for the last 75 years, with the terrible human cost in terms of transgenerational violence, misery, and trauma. One can hope, there are different strategies, that let there be economic trade, let there be stability. Maybe this issue will resolve by itself. India and Pakistan have been talking. They've talked in the past, but both countries talk in a language which the other side does not understand. The reason for that is that there are differing perceptions on what is the Kashmir issue. I have researched on the Kashmir issue since 1995, as a part of my doctoral research. And what I figured out for a person who's got nothing to do as such with Kashmir is that there's a confusion of what is precisely the Kashmir issue. As far as India is concerned, the political discourse seems to equate the Kashmir issue with Article 370. And I believe that the genesis of the Kashmir issue is not located in Article 370. The solution cannot be found in Article 370. There is an ongoing debate in the country on Article 370, the rewriting of it as has been done by New Delhi recently. 370, for those who are not aware, was basically an article in the Indian Constitution to give effect to the terms of the instrument of accession executed by the ruler of the erstwhile princely state of Jammu and Kashmir in favor of India on 26 October 1947. And this article basically was to let the State Constitutional Assembly finalize the constitutional relationship of that state, princely state, within the Union of India. For those who would like to, and then of course it has been rewritten in a way which has led to constitutional challenges which are pending for the Supreme Court. A recent book by Professor Moolchand Sharma, the Article 370 monologue, captures the historical background, why it was there, what is the rewriting or abrogation imply, and more importantly, what is the international community's response to the rewriting of Article 370. Pakistan is a very different view of what is the Kashmir issue. I have in my book tried to reconcile or I've elaborated on the differing perceptions that has led to the current political stalemate between India, Pakistan, and indeed China, which holds about 20% of the territory of the princely state. We need to depoliticize the Kashmir issue for there to be any forward movement. And my book offers a somewhat a step-by-step way forward on how to resolve the multi-layered Kashmir issue, which has escaped consideration so far. But that discussion is for another day. We are not on a book talk on the Kashmir issue. But what I do want to emphasize when we talk about India, Pakistan at 75, that there's a lot that needs to be put in the public domain for the present generation about our shared heritage, the subcontinental culture, because for any movement, we need to stop demonizing each other. I have researched, my research of over 25 years from declassified British archives and authoritative sources, which I've referred to in my book. They document how the partition was scripted by the British for their own geopolitical and strategic reasons, how the British sowed the seed of conflict, of perpetual warfare on the subcontinent. These have been documented in exchange of telegrams between the Viceroy, the Secretary of State, the governors. It's all there. And for those who doubt whether the British scripted the partition, you can just draw parallels to what happened in the Middle East with the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. In fact, even before that, the way we had East India Company arriving in Surat in Gujarat in 1608, a few decades before that, you had Levant Company arriving which had engaged with the Ottoman Empire to do trading there. And just the way the British used the Islamic crescent, the Northwest Frontier Province, Gilgit-Baltistan region as a buffer against Russian influence coming southwards for the Great Game. The Ottoman Empire was used as a buffer. but with Germany coming into its own being a challenge, you can draw parallels about how the way Sharif Hussein was identified, chosen to lead the Arab revolt. You had Jinnah, who was identified to be the sole representative of Indian Muslims and be to any kind of settlement between Hindus and Muslims. You can draw parallels how the Middle East was drawn upon artificial sectarian lines, Kuwait, Palestine, here on religious lines, India, Pakistan. Even there's a parallel even of exchange of population between Greece and Turkey in the Middle East. Here between India and Pakistan under a hastily organized Punjab boundary force. There, of course, it was far more organized. It was under the League of Nations. Identical politics, few decades apart between the Middle East and the subcontinent. It was, the book details the similarities of these digital similarities, which shows that partition was indeed scripted. In fact, it was a foregone conclusion. I've documented telegrams from 1940 onwards, where there was already talk of the two dominants, because the political leadership in India had not cooperated with the British in the World War effort. And so there was already a discussion how to fracture the subcontinent with the political leadership of undivided India, our eminent leaders, failing to rise to the challenge. This generation needs to know how the entire subcontinent, whether it's Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, how the entire subcontinent was taken by a ride by the British, with the active connivance and collusion of international institutions like the United Nations Security Council. I've documented, I've recreated what happened in the UNSC, whether it was for the Hyderabad issue, Junagadh issue, Kashmir issue, to show how the United Nations Security Council willfully acted against the United Nations Charter. So there's been a subversion of the institutions right from the beginning. It is a political institution, but there's one thing to act, use political means to settle an issue. Another is to act directly, deliberately in violation of the UN Charter itself. We on the subcontinent continue to pay the price, even 75 years after going in our respective ways. I believe that if these facts, which have been dispassionately recorded by the British themselves, what they did on the subcontinent, why they did what they did on the subcontinent, how they did it, if that is put in public knowledge across the subcontinent, it could pave a way for closure of the trauma of partition. It could create conducive environment on resolution of many contentious issues, including the Kashmir issue. Of course, the solution I proposed in the book is completely different. It is in a way to depoliticize the Kashmir issue, but then it is much more than only creating a conducive environment. We can't undo borders. We can't undo partition. But we can certainly create an environment where our borders become peaceful, or maybe even irrelevant, so as to bring about precisely what has been talked about: increased bilateral trade, having some kind of a economic unity, having some kind of vested interest in maintaining peace. So since I'm conscious of the time, it's already 8:40 India time, I'll stop here and I'll be happy to take questions. But I think the message, one can argue ad nauseum as to which party that forward, who did what, why they did it. But I think the way you had a conciliation in South Africa is high time. It's okay to have a partition museum at Amritsar. It's okay to have things which where we give condolences for the loss of life. But it is high time that there has to be an acknowledgement that wrong has been done on the subcontinent. and all the stakeholders have to come together for a kind of a reconciliation. One has to address the psychological aspect before one can hope to have movement on the ground on different other aspects. So even if we take that message on this India-Pakistan 75 meet, I think it would be a great step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your remarks and going deep dive into the Kashmir issue and about your research, basically focused on the Kashmir, about the global responses. You talked about the global responses of Article 370 that mentioned in Professor Mulchan Sharma's book that I also have got a chance to see that book because I worked with him too. And the point that you raised here, that Kashmir is the heart of the India-Pakistan relation. Kashmir is in the heart of, and the how to take a reconciliatory approach. So we will, I will take it on the question about that reconciliatory approach, is that connected to the development approach, not for the security. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Mr. Mohammad Rizawan. Sir, floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Indu, for inviting me and to inviting me to be a part of this distinguished panel. I really appreciate. Well, you have given me 10 minutes to, touch upon the past, present, and future of these two very important nations. I will try. So the best thing is that I will touch a little bit of history, because the more we advance, the more history becomes irrelevant. And in today's terms, as I see it, I don't see many connections which could impact the present or even future, those historical connections. They have been fading with the historical times, and now, I mean, they are definitely taking new trajectories and new dimensions. India and Pakistan at 75. Actually, it's not about India and Pakistan alone. I'll definitely speak to India and Pakistan. The whole world is going through tremendous challenges because of shifting winds, shifting sands, shifting balances of power here, there, in front of them, in their backyard, everywhere. So it's not only India and Pakistan who have to, who are a bit shaken, and they have to decide which foot to stand on. It's most of the countries in the world are thinking in these terms because the times are such. In my lifetime, I haven't seen such a tumultuous changes coming, happening. Though I have seen, fall of Berlin Wall, end of Soviet Union, emergence of European Union, many things. But the times we are going through now are going to define basically the next course of the century. So that's why there is a worry, there is a concern everywhere that how to navigate this time without damaging one's interests, both geopolitical interests and economic interests. So it's the answer is not easy. I mean, it will never be easy for any of the countries to navigate. I mean, everybody would definitely wish and would try to navigate those challenges as smoothly as possible, as planned as possible, as calculated as possible. But there are headwinds, and there are these are difficult times. Well, in history, India and Pakistan, as we know, have taken different courses soon after independence. Pakistan, went into their kind of balloon of religious nationalism led by their military, and they decided to make that a security state. India, while on the other hand, under their wise leadership, they tried to consolidate what they got. And that was a miracle, consolidating a country like India with so much ethnicity, diversity, and and they never even had experienced even self-rule in their lives. So it was tremendous, remarkable achievement. India, consolidated itself and then tried to negotiate the world as it see it, and that was the bloc world. And then India made the most remarkable decisions of its life when they liberalized the economy, when they shifted their tilt towards where the technology was, where the economic interests were, and where the economy was. And that worked. And it paid very quick dividends, it paid very rich dividends. And India, as we see now, has made tremendous progress over the 2 decades, which we saw. But now there are challenges, like I said. I mean, the one challenges relate to the times we are living in now at the moment. And the challenges, I'm sorry about my voice. I have a sore throat and a fever, so that's why I'm sounding a bit weak. So please bear with me. So there are definitely challenges. And for Pakistan never changed its habits and its course. It remained stuck in that security state thing. It remained stuck with that, its existence on the basis of enmity with India. It saw geopolitical benefits in aligning itself permanently with the competing interests. I mean, it was aligned with the US and Europe, and it was aligned with the China, and it was aligned with Russia, and it was aligned with Middle East. There is no conflict as long as the world is full. I mean, there is no conflict. There is no problem with that. But soon you run into problem with these things. So most of the countries are witnessing this, that soon you run into problem with these, if you don't pick your friends and foes very, very, very carefully. For Pakistan, we know what state Pakistan is in now. It's a story the whole world knows. Economically, it's a meltdown kind of situation. Militarily, I can say, I don't know how much they've got, but economy is very closely related to your military strength. So it's not as, as big a threat for India, at least, as it used to be, as I can see, because they wouldn't have those open pipeline budgets now, those military guys, and they will have very less to spend on that. That's why they are probably thinking to look inward now. The problem with India and Pakistan most of the time is that it's not the problem what world thinks about them. The problem is what they think about themselves. That's the problem. I mean, and that's way beyond the reality. I mean, they don't fix themselves at the level where they actually are. They multiply it for 100 times, and then they try to play over there. So, and it's not, I mean, the world always look at them with compassion, care, and cooperation and friendship, but it's the problem is the way they see themselves, how they act on the stage. So apart from that, as far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan's future will be decided by 2 things. First, can it create, and I doubt it can it create a self-sustained economic viability for its state? Can it? Second, can it shift its focus from a security state to an economically viable state, and which is politically viable as well? The second challenge, the most threatening challenge to Pakistan is its national integration. The Sindhis are not happy, the Floyds are not happy. KPK has Taliban and multitude of problems which are not easy to address. So that is something also. But the, all these problems can be answered if the state shifts focus from having enmity with India as a permanent raison d'etre for its existence. And at the same time, because those pipelines from the West and the US, they are drying up. And Pakistan doesn't have economy of its own. I mean, pardon my sweeping language, but more or less it's the same thing. If you have just that much little bit, and you have to ask the rest 80-70% for people. So it's as bad as that. So two things. Can they sustain their own economy? Can they build like it will be like rebuilding the whole thing, the whole project Pakistan? Can they do it? And in the presence of especially those challenges which will come from the provinces. The problem is they can do it. They can do it. The military can try to do it, but it's a very, very tricky situation. The more military will try to do it, the more it will undo this whole thing. You know what I mean? So it's like the more they will get, I mean, the situation calls for them to just stay away and let people do something about it. Let people figure out what this state is, why we were created, where we want to go, what we want to do. But the moment military steps out, all its institutions and all its foundational structures, they will collapse. So that's something which is not very easy to address. So this, Pakistan military, and I don't know if there are any civil people left over there who can think about it. I doubt it, but they will have to rethink the whole thing. And then, like Ambassador said, that it has to be based on, and Michael also said that, it has to be based on how we can complement India. They always looked at India as a competitor, as a source of conflict, and which can feed their economy. But now they will have to look at India, which can feed their economy, but not as a source of conflict, but as a source of complementary source. So I would stop there. If there are any questions, I would probably expand on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rizawan, for your remarks. And let's, due to looking at the time constraint, I will jump on my question first, and then we have the several questions in chat box too for our speakers. So I just am curious to know about we talked about a lot, like reconciliatory approach or the development approach, not to look at the security approach. So I just want to know from our, I know, Mr. Ambassador, you have the diplomatic experience, and other experts have the different experience in the region. So what are the applicable measures? Like not looking at international community, can India-Pakistan take those steps to reconcile, to reset or reboot their relationship, and that is practical too? So I would like to invite Ambassador first, and please.
Things that we have tried several times, both the countries. There have been agreements, there have been understandings that have been reached. But if you come to think of it, what is really the breaker in this whole thing? The deal breaker has been, once again, a security mindset, and secondly, the problem of terrorism, cross-border terrorism. See, that is the root cause of all the problems between India and Pakistan. India and Pakistan both had agreed. India had agreed to discuss Kashmir, one of the committees at the foreign secretary level. are no longer meetings taking place, but there were decisions as Mr. Rizawan, everybody else, Michael also mentioned about it. So we have a lot of potential, a lot of possibilities, a lot of complementarities. But the moment you start looking at it from a security perspective, and of course every country has to protect itself and its population, and then everything comes to an end. I believe that there is a tremendous possibility in our country. We can always find various complementary ways for developing. And as you know, India is one of the largest provider of capacity building assistance in the world. To 161 countries across the world, India provides assistance, including to all the other 6 countries in the SAARC. So I feel that, can you hear me?
Mr. Ambassador, yes, please, could you make it a bit louder, please?
Problem with the mic. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
It's better.
Yeah.
So as I said, that India is one of the few countries in the world which provides assistance to nearly 160 countries. And it is share and care basis. And Pakistan could not have been left out of it had we not had this kind of a security mindset and zero-sum policy coming from the other side. So if that can be somehow put to rest, if Pakistan continues to take credible action against the terrorist groups which are operating out of there and be a normal country, I mean, I think that India would be very happy. It is much more easier for us to work with them than with anybody else.
Okay, thank you, sir. Michael, would you like to say on this question, like how to, and I would like to suggest you take the question from the chat box too. There is one question because we have very less time for our, it's on terrorism. Do I need to read it for you?
I see it. Yeah, thank you. So very briefly to the first question, you know, one could look at this with a glass half full or empty. In terms of the latter, you know, the world face some of the biggest threats the world faces today are borderless, right? Climate change, pandemics. We're living that out right now. And what I worry about is that if there were ever an opportunity or a motivation for India and Pakistan to set aside their many issues and try to forge pathways for cooperation, it would be now, because both of them are equally impacted by those issues. And yet we haven't seen that. I know that there were some attempts through SAARC during the beginning of the pandemic to bring the region together, including India and Pakistan, to discuss cooperation, but it didn't work out very well in terms of India and Pakistan. There's been no progress, so far as I know, on any type of dialogue around climate change issues. Certainly the Indus Waters Treaty is relevant because it relates to water shortages, which is clearly an effect of climate change. But beyond that, beyond track 2s, I don't see anything on official level. So that's unsettling, but I hope that could in the future provide more ballast or motivation for the two to revisit the fact that they have not cooperated in that area. In terms of the question in the chat, you know, very briefly, I would argue that the U.S. war on terror is basically over, or it's not over, but it's moved on. I think that the main U.S. foreign policy goal now, unlike right after 9/11, is the competition with China. That's going to dominate U.S. policy, foreign policy considerations on the whole, and that clearly has implications for this relationship we're talking about, particularly because India is viewed on multi-partisan levels in Washington as a critical partner in the effort to counter Chinese power, whereas Pakistan, for the reasons I mentioned before, is on the outside left looking in because it's closely allied with China. But final point, the US does not have an alliance with India. It has an alliance with Pakistan, which doesn't really make sense because it's so much closer to India than Pakistan. But I would sort of just point that out because I think the language can be important in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, my question for reconciliatory approach to Mr. Aman Hingorani, and also I would like to take the question, given the impact of the pandemic that is in the chat for you, various initiatives from China, like the port in Sri Lanka and the Belt Road Initiative. How do you expect the South Asian countries to formulate their strategy in resolving neighbor issues?
Well, let me clarify, I'm not for a reconciliatory approach. My idea was that when I gave in my presentation was that the entire subcontinent has a common heritage and they should know exactly what has happened, why we reached this position. When it comes to resolving issues between India and Pakistan, we don't have a political solution. We don't have a diplomatic solution. We don't have economic solution. We don't have a military solution. And so one way of, and a striking feature also of what India and Pakistan is, that they are created by the same constitutional law, which both countries have agreed to follow. The Government of India Act 1935, Indian Independence Act 1947 has been repealed, but both India and Pakistan are creations of the same statute, and is useful to see the legal underpinnings of the disputes between India and Pakistan. So take, for instance, Kashmir. Did not the law which created India, the accession being in terms of that law, make Kashmir, J&K an integral part of India? More importantly, did not the same law which created Pakistan make J&K an integral part of India? If Pakistan disputes that law, there is no Pakistan. One way of depoliticizing any issues is check the legal underpinnings of that particular issue. And if we go to a body like the ICJ, or even if it's a non-binding judicial mini trial, just to have parties recheck their legal stand on the status of any territory. If we just do that, and if we find that J&K, in my view, J&K became an integral part of India in 1947. Pakistan itself had no standing. It is India that confers standing on Pakistan by taking the Kashmir issue to the United Nations. Because as one sovereign country acceding to another sovereign country, a third sovereign country cannot veto that accession. So J&K became an integral part of India. It remains an integral part of India. Should that reality check be there, then that brings into jeopardy the CPEC. The Pakistan Economic Corridor runs from Gilgit-Baltistan. That's Indian territory. Should there be a reality check, it will make all our neighbors, including China, more flexible as to how to rework relations. Nobody's saying India is virtually impossible to throw out China from the territory they put billions of dollars there. They put optic fibers, highways, etc. They're not likely to vacate even if it's Indian territory. But if they accept Indian sovereignty, there's nothing to prevent, as I've suggested in other forums, India reworking the relations with China and Pakistan under Indian sovereignty to gain from that economic corridor. So things can change if there is a clarity as to what is the legal status of, in case of Kashmir issue, what is the legal status of J&K? We know it is a part of India, but it is India which went to United Nations. It was India which conferred a disputed territory tag. We need to get rid of the disputed territory tag so that the world says it's a part of India. And then we rework relations. So that is also linked up with the question which is there, which talks about the pandemic initiatives like China for the Belt Road Initiative. China is expanding its sphere of influence by giving loans, which then mortgages in a way the Donny sovereignty. We've seen that in Sri Lanka. It is reached into Africa. This entire corridor takes it into Middle East. The only way which will make China more flexible, it will help resolve LSE. Imagine the cost India is spending, imagine the amount of money India is spending in maintaining LOC and LSE, which could go in developing the country. A resolution of the Kashmir issue by declaring J&K to be an integral part of India, which it is, would also make China more flexible on the eastern front, on Arunachal Pradesh side. So there's a huge amount of possibilities, huge amount of ways by which we can break the political stalemate. I do not agree that history does not have a role. History does have a role we need to undo mistakes. We have had a legally flawed policy right from 1947 on Kashmir. New Delhi has been, in my view, as I've described in the book, been following a policy which is contrary to its own constitution. We have disowned POK. New Delhi cannot disown its people or its territory. The territories of J&K occupied by Pakistan and China are Indian territory. They're Indian citizens staying there. They've lost their consciousness of being Indian citizens. So we need to, under what provision of the constitution can a government or even parliament cede national territory? When the constitution says, the Supreme Court has construed the constitution to say, parliament cannot amend basic structure. Basic structure includes unity and territorial integrity of the country. If that is the position, then how can there be an unofficial policy of status quo? So we need to bring our policies in line with our constitution. We need to get back our people in our territory. We can't keep sitting on the fence. For that reason, we need to go back to the international stage. JK is 20% is with China, about 35% with Pakistan. It is not a bilateral issue. We need to get back our territory. We can't keep close our eyes and say, well, because of the lessons we learned in 1947-48 in international politics from the West, we don't want to get back into the international stage. We have a generations of bureaucrats, IFS officers, the government bureaucracy, will go into shivers thinking of going back to the international stage. We need to get out of that mindset. India of today is not India of 1947. So there are many ways to address this, by which I think has escaped consideration. I'm sure this is a debatable proposition which I'm making. I'm sure there are many views and many caveats to it, and that can be discussed, but it is a point of discussion.
Thanks.
You're muted.
Yes, sir. I would like to take the next question from the chat. It's from Francis, and he's asking, there are overlapping of economic architecture in the Indo-Pacific with some regional organizations like BRI and RCEP and CPTPP. As India is now a member of the IPEF, how do you think it will shape her relationship with Pakistan and China? What could be some of the challenges and opportunities for India? I would like to invite any of our speakers who want to jump in for this question.
Well, can I?
Yeah, sure.
Well, in fact, this is, there are plethora of various agreements and trade agreements that are being signed. A lot of announcements are being made all over, whether it is the United States talking of Build Back Better, nothing has moved on that. European Union is the gateway proposition, that has not moved. IPEF is also one of such organizations in which, of course, China is not there, but several ASEAN countries and India is also part of it. So these are alternative mechanisms which are yet to fructify. So I wouldn't put all my eggs in any of these baskets. In fact, one has to continue to strengthen its own value and supply chains, because we have seen what happens when you are singularly dependent on a country like China, which we have seen during the pandemic and otherwise. So there is a greater focus on India, in India especially, to become a part of a global value and supply chains through the regional efforts, through bilateral efforts, and by plugging into the major markets in that sense, while India itself is a very big market. So I think that this Atmanirbhar Bharat, these kind of activities with a global mindset are much more important today to work in order to achieve those objectives. But one question is there about the China-Russia, how to, you see, I said briefly in this, what I am looking at is very disconcerting. After the Russia-Ukraine war, as well as the China-Taiwan and USA problem that happened recently, what I am looking at is something like a Cold War 2.0 coming up, in which what is happening is that the world is no longer confident of a single financial architecture like the SWIFT or the Western dominated Bretton Woods institutions. I was talking to a French member of European Parliament who said even in Europe, we don't know how you can seize some countries' total foreign exchange assets. And so the basic problem one is facing today is how how to create confidence in institutions, which has been lost. And so when you have two diverse kind of opposing viewpoints and opposing institutions, one would be China, Russia led, the other may be the US or the West led, and there is always a place for third. So now we are seeing a more and more currency swaps, arrangements, and all kinds of bilateral currency mechanisms coming out. So it will all depend in a very confused, and as Mr. Rizawan said, the world is going through a churn. So it is too premature at this stage to really see how it will go. So it will depend on individual countries' strengths.
Thanks, sir. Now I would like to take the last comment from Michael and from Mr. Rizawan. So for these questions, and to wrap up the session.
Sure, I could go first.
Mhm.
I think, to the point about IPEF, there were several questions in the chat box about India and IPEF. I would, I think, maybe underscore what was said before, that we shouldn't put too much stock in IPEF. It's really a vision document more than anything else. It's not a policy. It's not much more than that. I think IPEF was essentially meant to be the US responding to criticism that it hasn't really come up with a solid economic vision for its Indo-Pacific policy, that had been too security focused. And so then it came out with IPEF. And I think it's an advantage. India can't lose by being a part of IPEF, because it shows that it's committed to being a part of this new Indo-Pacific architecture to sort of push back against criticism that it wasn't involved in RCEP. But at the same time, certainly India disagrees with some of the positions taken by many of the other members on multiple issues, labor rights, environmental issues, and so on. But since IPEF is so incipient, and since there's not much to it, it doesn't have to worry about getting to the point where there need to be negotiations over issues that may be problematic for it. So it could just sort of sit back and say that it's a part of this group, which is, again, this institute, which is very incipient. So I think it's a win-win for India. I don't think it has to worry about problems for its relations with China or Pakistan in that regard. It's very different from the Quad and even from the Blue Dot Network and some of these more developed accompanying institutions to the Indo-Pacific policy. So thank you. I really appreciated the opportunity. It was a great discussion, very civil, and thank you to the moderator for a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rizawan, would you like to say your comments?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, yes, Dr. Indo, I would kind of, I don't see any question which really I think I can answer.
Okay, all right, sir.
But I would like to leave few concluding comments on possibly most of the people who are listening to us and the people in general are looking at developments inside Pakistan and in India as well, and then try to make an interplay of these two developments and how they would settle and where. These are very genuine questions, and these are very, concerning thoughts. I think whatever is happening in Pakistan now, that will decide how Pakistan's relations with India in near future will progress. It's not only Pakistan, I'm talking about the FPAC region. And it will also decide, it can, I'm not saying it will, it can also decide that what kind of role, if any, Pakistan can play in Indo-Pacific, or if at all it has any capacity or willingness to play any role. So these are the two things which will decide basically how Pakistan and India's relation will move forward. India definitely will watch the level of stability inside Pakistan, which is not very easy to gauge at the moment. and it's a work in progress. I mean, we have to see the come out, but things are moving towards stability. But stability in Pakistan doesn't mean stability in any other part of the world. Stability in Pakistan can be very short-lived, it can be very fickle, and sometimes, Dr. Christian Ferry, she calls Pakistan the most most stable instability. That's what is, talks about Pakistan. So I don't know if Pakistan for the next couple of years consolidate itself a little bit economically, then it can have a good relation, a trade-based relationship with India. But even if that stability is not there, I don't think New Delhi will be very much interested in, going forward and moving beyond borders and, trying to offer trade incentives to Pakistan. That's how the world works. It's nothing very emotional about. So it will all depend how Pakistan, unfolds in the next 3-4 months.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Rizawan, for your concluding remarks. And here I would like to tell, one of our audience, she is asking about the video recording. Yes, we would be provide the video recording, and we will post it at social media at our website too. And now I'm wrapping the session and would like to thank you to all our panelists, Mr. Ambassador sir, thank you so much, Mr. Dr. Aman Hingorani and Michael, thank you, and Mr. Rizawan. So, and stay tuned for our next event. We are going to discuss the Al-Qaeda's future after Al-Jawari. So I will keep posting the updates and will.
Indo, I just noticed Pavanji is also online, and she's put a chat in the box about how to improve India-Pakistan relationship through the Kartarpur corridor. That is something which is also something which I'm sure Rizwanji would have liked to talk about, how perhaps that initiative will actually improve India-Pakistan relationship.
Yes, that's a book about the global responses on Article 370 and written by Professor Mulchan Sharma. I would that's an interesting book, and for the researcher and the students, I would like to advise to our students and audience to have a look at the book, and that might of your interest and for your researcher for in future. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. And we will post it soon. I will send the video recording to our panelists. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aman.
Thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot.
Aman. Yeah.
Have a great day, and wishing you all that happy Independence Day to India and Pakistan.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. So, Indu, it's over, huh?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
It's nice. It's Aman has spoken very. In fact, Aman is there or is left. Aman, are you there?